Hi, everyone, and welcome. We get to have a great conversation today. Um, this is sort of the start of our series, and today we're going to be talking with Annie Margaret from CU Boulder all about digital wellness. How do we talk with teens about social media, all of that fun stuff. So this session is recorded, and then we're going to meet again on July 18th at 9 a.m. I did double check my notes. Um, to have a conversation together where you can ask your questions from this conversation. So this should be a really fun start to all that. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Annie Margaret. Thank you so much for being here. So excited for this conversation today.
Thank you, Sadie. Hi. So as Sadie said, I am faculty at the University of Colorado Boulder at the Atlas Institute, where I research the impacts of social media use on adolescent mental health. I've been doing that work about 4 years now. And so I have some visual aids here I'll pull up, but I tend to pop in and out of the visual aids. So we'll just start here and see how it goes. And I'm going to try to focus today on cultivating supportive conversations. So what do teens want adults to know? We kind of a focus as we go through this. And so as I mentioned, again, I focus on mental health and addictive design and thinking about mindfulness practices as an antidote to that. Open with some of the facts. I'm sure all of you know this already. This number's gone up slightly because this was from 2019. But if we think about 11 and 12-year-olds, 70% own a smartphone. And if we look at the time that they're spending on their phone, if you look at these numbers, you might think, oh, 4 hours isn't that much. But remember that this does not include time for school or homework. Okay, so teens are spending 7 hours on their phone, and that's not any school time. And if we think about how this plays a role in the family and family development, children are spending almost twice as long on their tech device, on their personal devices, as they are in conversation with their families. And I'm sure we all experience this, right? And feel frustrated about this. Like, why are they always on their phone? What are we going to do about it? And I'll explain to you a little bit today about why they're always on their phone and what we can do about it. And maybe why you're always on your phone, because you're doing it too. We're all doing it. So this data, I don't have the reference here, but it's from Sapien Labs. And so that's a great resource if you want to look that one up. And so MHQ is mental health quotient, which is a survey given related to whether you are distressed and struggling or thriving. And so if you look at the axis here, you can see the age of first smartphone ownership, and then they're polling 18 to 24-year-olds. So if you got your first smartphone when you were 6, 7, 8, 9, you're doing much worse with your mental health when you were 18 to 24 than if you waited to get that first smartphone until you were, 13, 14, 18, right? And so I bring this up. Again, we can see the percent that are distressed or struggling is higher if you got your smartphone when you were younger. And so I bring this up to say that one of the main things we can do is just try to create a cultural shift around encouraging people to wait. Just if you're a parent or you're talking to parents, just hold out as long as you possibly can, and there are real social consequences for why we can't hold out. And I understand that. We'll talk about that too.
Can I ask a quick question, Annie?
Yeah.
When you say smartphone, you mean a literal phone, not tablets or other pieces.
Yes.
It's the phone itself.
The phone itself, yep, the smartphone, and specifically the sort of connectivity that comes with that. So I suppose a tablet, this research was done specifically related to an independent, so you have your own smartphone and you own it and it's yours, right? Not sharing, I go on my mom's iPad sometimes, right? That's a different sort of experience. Great question, thank you. And please continue to interrupt me with questions. And so a lot of you have seen The Social Dilemma. If you haven't checked that out, Center for Humane Technology, Tristan Harris is a personal hero of mine. So if you're looking for more resources, that's a great place to go. Center for Humane Technology. And so my point to bring this all to fruition, I've been saying, oh, everybody's on their phone too much. This is not the kid's fault. This is not the parents' fault. The platforms are designed to be addictive. Right. And so if we think about, I'll go through some features of the design, and then we'll talk about how that interacts with your brain. And so if you think about pull to refresh, this motion, if you look at me for a minute in the corner here, boop, boop, right? If you think that they don't have the technology to just refresh the content, right? Come on, you don't have to. That is to create a motor response, a motor reflex, right? Same as a slot machine. And I'll get into a little later why that is so tricky to bypass those sort of motor responses. Red notifications, we all know this, right? Eye tracking studies, our eyes are drawn to red and it carries a high valence for us. And so we look at those little bubbles and we think this is very important. Put your phone on grayscale. Do it. Try it. You're going to love it. Actually, you're going to hate it, but then you're going to love how you feel. And then another one is variable reward. And so this is sort of Skinner. If you're familiar, this is the Skinner stuff from Psych 101, which is about how if you give rats an addictive substance, a lever where they can access an addictive substance, and they hit the lever, and every time they hit the lever, they get the same amount. Eventually they get bored and they go back to doing their rat life. They're like, meh, this isn't that fun. I don't know. Every time I do this, I get a little bit of drugs and But if you give it in such a way where sometimes they get none and sometimes they get a lot, the rats will sit there and push the lever until they die, right? And so if we apply this to the design of social media, every time you go to open those applications, you don't know how many likes, how many comments, how many retweets, what the reward is going to be. And so that in itself is incredibly addictive. If every time you posted a photo, you knew you were going to get 40 likes from the same 40 people, you wouldn't care very much. You know, who cares? Okay, and so if we're thinking about addiction, again, another resource here, Common Sense Media, if you're not familiar, makes great educational resources for young people and adults. And so this is from their research showing that, yeah, even teens know they're addicted. They report that they feel addicted, and adults do too. And so sometimes a question I often get is like, well, this is just moral panic, right? Everybody panicked about the printing press, right? That was going to be horrible, and it was fine. And I think the tides are changing, and there's a good chance that it's going to be fine, but there's also a good chance that it's not going to be fine unless we make some serious changes and learn how to talk about these things. And so we're going to. So a few ways it's different, right? The power of artificial intelligence. So we now have massive supercomputers that can predict exactly what you want to see. The TikTok algorithm is a perfect example of this. They get you so fine-tuned to show you exactly what you want. 24/7 influence, right? So the morning paper was not something you carried around, maybe if you were a certain kind of person, but was not something you carried around with you in your pocket that was buzzing at you to read it all of the time. Personalization. So it's not a, again, to use the morning paper metaphor, it's not everyone getting the same experience. It's you getting your personalized experience. Right? It's a fun activity to do, right? Search something and compare your search results with a friend, you know, either in the Instagram Explore page or even just in Google, and you'll see how personalized it really is. And then I'm talking about social control last, because I think this is the most important one, specifically as it relates to adolescent development. So social control, no other media from the past or technology has redefined our social lives to such an extent, with impacts for our sense of social belonging, our sense of self-esteem, the transparency of where we stand in the social hierarchy has never been so clear. So we'll circle back to that one as well. Okay, so those are some of the design features. Yes, Sadie, thank you.
I'm just trying to understand. So, well, just because we do talk about like, how do we not overreact but not underreact, it really is that we need to understand what this technology is doing. Am I understanding you, like that this is hitting us differently than any other technology has hit mankind? So we need to understand it on a different level and not minimize or completely panic.
Yes, exactly. That's such a beautiful paraphrase, right? It's about, you know, the philosopher in me, right, in this moment is like, yes, the middle way. Yes, right. We don't need to overreact into extreme moral panic, but we do need to understand that this has really serious, the design of these technologies have really serious consequences that we've never seen before. And so swinging all the way to the other end of saying, oh, it's just moral panic, is also not true. There are really significant things happening, specifically as it relates to this social control piece and how this impacts our feelings of trust in relationship, and how we do pair bonding, and how we form lasting relationships. And anyway, that's shameless self-promotion. That's a whole class I teach. So I'll just stop and keep going because I could go on a thing there. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about, right, I did explain some of the design features: pull to refresh, red notification bubbles, all these things, right? These addictive design features, autoplay, you all know them, I hope. And now how do those interact with our nervous system? And this is important. So you have an autonomic nervous system. If you don't know any nervous system stuff, this is fine. I'm going to give you the very most basic thing you need. So your autonomic nervous system controls all the things that you're not consciously thinking about. So if I ask you right now, are you thinking about breathing as you're listening to me talking? Maybe if you meditate a lot, you are, but probably 99% of you are not thinking about your breathing. It's just happening. Are you thinking when you suddenly have the urge to go poop? Were you thinking like, oh, I wonder if I have to poop? No, it just happens, right? So this is all your autonomic nervous system. There's two branches to this: your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, right? We feel this when we experience a threat. And your parasympathetic nervous system, which is more active when kind of in rest and digest and calm, times of calm. Deep breathing helps activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So it's a really good practice for when you feel stressed. Click. Okay. And so if we think about what we know about our autonomic nervous system, and again, the point of why I'm bringing this up is that this is not in our conscious control. So how is this part of our system interacting with social media? So notifications, they've done studies on this. Every time your phone buzzes and dings and whatever, right? Releases a little bit of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that activates that fight or flight response. And so now we've got everybody just walking around with low-grade chronic cortisol, right? Because this is not an actual threat. So we're not doing anything to resolve the stress cycle. We're just experiencing the little spike in stress and then carrying on with our lives all day long, every day. Turn your notifications off. Turn them off. All of them.
So we're constantly getting elevated
Yes.
as we go through our day. Every time we hear those dings or wow.
Yeah. And so in the past, right, if we think about evolutionary biology, another pet topic of mine, in the past, if you got a cortisol spike, it was often because of a real threat. And so then you did something physically to resolve what we call resolving the stress cycle. So something happens, you see the tiger, you run, right? Something bad happens, you cry, you shake. You see animals do this, right? When they get freaked out, you see those videos, right, of cats that get scared by cucumbers, they jump and they shake, right? And that resolves the stress cycle. But what we're doing is just exposing ourselves to the stress stimulus and then doing nothing and just going through our lives. So please turn off your notifications unless they're from a real person. Okay, now to go back to pull to refresh or double tap to like, right? You guys know this one? Bing, bing, right? You go through Instagram, tap, 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 tap. So these are motor responses. It's pull to refresh, double tap to like. Who has had, well, I guess there's no one real here to answer except Sadie. But Sadie, have you had the experience of where you get your phone out to do a task, right? You're going to look something up or send someone a message or something. And before you know it, you're in application X.
Oh, all the time. I mean, it's incredible how easy it is to just follow this is how I start my morning, or this is what I do at this time of day, even if it's not what I intended to do.
Yes. So they are designed, what you're referring to is habituation, right? It's just a repeated behavior. And the reason motor responses are an important part of this is because they also bypass, and it's an involuntary or instantaneous movement in response to a stimulus. So if we think of our phone as the stimulus, right? And I'm not immune from this. Okay. I'm teaching this, but I want to be clear that I am not like cured in some way. Right. But you pick up your phone, and, I've since deleted Instagram because I couldn't handle it. But when I did have Instagram still, I would immediately, when I picked up my phone, I would click it, even though that wasn't why I picked up my phone. right? And so there was this motor response of tabbing the thing. And a little experiment I encourage everyone to try is move them around, move your apps around, just move them. And look how often you click where it used to be. Whatever your one is, Instagram, Twitter, for some people it's email. That's mine now. Mine now is email, right? Whatever your one is that you have the habituation to, move it and watch what happens. So anyway, I bring this up is that in that it's an automatic response. It doesn't have conscious thought. And these things are designed in this way, right? This wasn't something that could happen with the morning paper. It didn't have the design built into it to create habituation. Maybe you could create a habit where you read it while you're on your commute, or you read it in the morning while you eat breakfast. So there's kind of some habituation there, but the repetition, because it's not in your pocket doing a specific motor response, the strength of habituation wasn't really built into the design of, say, the newspaper. Does that make sense?
So the design of, so our other habits in life, whatever they might be, good or bad, we create for ourselves. This is a habit that it's helping us create. Like it's leading us to create this as a habit versus it being something that we kind of do on our own accord.
Yes.
Yes,
that's exactly right. So there's kind of a loss of agency that happens here, right? Because of the way it's designed. Right. And so again, remember, I started this section by saying this isn't your fault and this isn't your kid's fault. I'm going to explain to you why the design is part of the problem. Right. And so, yes, exactly. All right. Just quick little ditty on neurotransmitters. I'm going to keep us in under time. I promise. Just hang in there with me while I nerd out for a minute. So you maybe know about neurotransmitters, right? They're just molecules that cross across neurons, communicate between neurons, right? Move across synapses. You know, and I think you'll have the slides if you want to go back and read, I don't know. But some of the favorites, right? The most popular ones that you hear about in the media are dopamine, right? So we've all heard of dopamine, I assume, right? Sugar, shopping, sex, addictive substances, right? This is the one that made the variable reward rats that I mentioned earlier go crazy. But I want to do something important here that's important to me as like trying to wear my little neuroscience hat, is to say that dopamine kind of gets a bad rap because it's also involved in motivation. So it gets you out of bed in the morning. It's involved in exercise. It helps you get things, like when you have to get stuff done, there's dopamine involved in that. And so I just want to, it does get kind of a bad rap, but I'm not sure it's not so black and white as dopamine is addictive, right? There's good to it too.
So dopamine is important. It's just easily co-opted by some of these maybe less than desirable moments.
Yes, exactly. Yes, because it's involved in motivation, right? So one I like to tell about dopamine is that people who smoke cigarettes, when they are craving, right, is involved in craving. So if you do test to see when they're releasing the most dopamine, it's not actually when they get the cigarette. It's the moment that they want the cigarette, and are about to get it. Right. So they don't have it yet, but the moment when they're like, I'm gonna get it, right? That moment of just before the satisfaction happens, that's the peak of dopamine. And so if we think about that as it relates to social media, right? Craving, thinking about it, thinking about checking it the moment just before you see how many likes you got. And serotonin. So this one's involved in, there's a lot more neurotransmitters. I'm just only mentioning 3 today, so this one's involved in content feelings of social acceptance. It makes me say, I feel good. This is enough. You often hear about serotonin imbalance being involved in depression or anxiety. And then oxytocin is another one, often called the love hormone. So this is the one that makes you feel pair bonding. It happens when you cuddle or hug, or it's released in high amounts with mothers of newborns, right? That sort of mama bear chemical or neurotransmitter. Okay. So those are some of them. If we think about how social media is relating to this neurotransmitter, and we want these to be in balance, to be healthy. Okay. So again, I talked about this already. Notifications, likes, comments release dopamine. And so you're getting this little reward response. It's hijacking your reward systems. And people repeat behaviors that lead to dopamine release, right? So anything's happening there. I just like to do a little lighthearted joke here because it gets kind of sad, but just a friendly reminder that these are the only two things you actually enjoy. That's so reductionistic. I don't actually believe that. I just think it's funny. Okay. But if we look at these right in the brain, so what do you notice here? Let's have Sadie talk a minute. Just look at the picture. What's different?
So the dopamine seems to only be in a certain part of our brain, while the serotonin's going everywhere, like into our full frontal.
Yes.
Well, so, yeah, sorry, I'm trying to see if I understand where I'm looking at in the brain. I'm not a brain person as much as I'd like to be, but it looks like it's going through everything versus just a few hidden spots.
Yes, exactly. So yes, exactly. Serotonin has more kind of coverage in the brain and importantly goes into areas that are involved, like the prefrontal cortex, that are involved in executive function and decision making, and more kind of what we would consider like conscious thought. So, okay, moving on from this. So we think about these neurotransmitters, and the other thing I want to mention maybe before I go into this actually is that when we think about how I'm going to stop share for a minute and just talk at you. Hello. So when we think about serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, these are all involved when we are relating to another human being. And I'm going to circle back to this in a little bit. So I'm trying to bring it up now, but I didn't have the right transition slide. But when we relate to another human being, we want to be experiencing some mixture of these neurotransmitters. And so if your social relationships are becoming so dopamine heavy, right? Are you following me? So you're on social media and your social relationships are now, how many likes did I get? Dopamine. How many notifications do I have? Dopamine, right? It's doing things to our neurochemistry of how we experience relationship. Relationship should not, a healthy relationship neurochemically is a mix of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, among other things. I'm oversimplifying, right? But for the purposes of this audience. And so healthy relationship should be a mixture of these things. And so if our relating is becoming dopamine only, this is problematic. This isn't to say that relationships that we have through our phone are not real relationships. It's just to say we need to understand, right, that this trending toward such intense dopamine orientation is not healthy for how we build strong relationships.
So is that when we're in person in a relationship, we're not getting those dopamine hits the way we are with that concentrated social media piece, because nobody can give me all of those things all the time. My dog can't, or anything like that. So is that where we're seeing some of these concerns with that mental health piece?
Yes. Yeah. Truth is, I don't know.
Okay.
But my suspicion is yes. Right. And so if we think about, I'm sitting here with you right now, right? I can see your face. I can see your body language. I can see all of these things. That is giving me some, and because I've talked to you before, there's some sense of serotonin there, like the feeling of contentedness and connection and that feeling. Now, if I was with you in real life, not through a screen, and we could also be holding hands, or that when I walked in the room, I could have said, "Oh, hi, Sadie," and given you a hug. Now I've also got oxytocin in the mix, right? Oh. And so anyway, I don't want to digress on this too long, but my point really is that we need to be cautious about leaning in too far to relating in a way that only, or that is so dopamine heavy. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about again, I'm circling back to design. So we're kind of going design, neuroscience. Now we're going back to some of the design features, and then we're going to go to social science. Okay. I should have given you an outline slide, but that's what we're doing. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. Okay, so if we think about design of digital technologies, I'm bringing this up because I think it's important to understand that there are certain what designers call affordances. You don't need to know that word, but there are certain things that aren't going to change even as the technologies change, right? So we go from Instagram to Snapchat to TikTok to whatever's next, right? Some things will be the same. So the idea of persistence, things stick around, right? Even if you delete your account, we've all experienced this. It's still out there somewhere. So the idea of persistence, the idea of scalability, meaning that one person can now reach a very, very large audience, right? Things can scale and amplify and spread. I chose this racy picture to remind me to bring up the point that as we get it later, if hopefully we'll have enough time, but when we start talking about kind of the sexting and nudes and these sorts of concerns, right? Replicability is a huge problem. So youth are experiencing this all the time. People taking screenshots of their text threads and then posting it on their story, right? Posting it on their story so that everyone else sees what this other person said. That also can apply to photographs, so everything can be replicated and shared. This is sort of the piece I was just talking about, this absence of physical cues, right? So we're now getting just likes and text communication. I'm going to go into this one a little bit further for just a moment. So we've got persistence, it sticks around, it's scalable, it's replicable, and we have the absence of physical cues. And so this study, I want to be clear, has since been debated, okay? Because whenever scientists assign a specific percent to something, then other scientists love to be like, no, that's not right. It's like, scientists love fighting about numbers. And so this is debated, but regardless, okay, so let's say they're off by threefold, right? Okay, so 7% of meaning is communicated through text only. Let's say they were off by 3 times and it's actually 21% that can be communicated by text only. That's still not enough, right?
And by text, you mean anything written. So
yes,
it could be book, could be newspaper, could be literal texts on your phone.
yes,
okay.
Of human to human communication. I would argue books are different because there's an intent there that you're not trying to have a conversation, right? Like I'm not trying to communicate with a book. I'm trying to imagine a story.
So it would be letters or.
Yes.
Okay. So the human to human communication. Okay.
Text messages, written letters. Yes, exactly. Right. Because I would say books and kind of newspaper articles and stuff aren't really the same because we're not trying to communicate.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so much of this happens through body language. The other 55%. So tone of voice, phone is better than text. FaceTime is better than phone, right? Is the point here. And then, sorry, my Slack is exploding. And so then as the other thing I like to bring out about the absence of physical cues is the importance of eye contact, right? So just fun, quick fact. Why do we have whites around our eyes?
Oh, it attracts. Does it make us look towards your eyes and focus on them?
Yes.
Oh,
partially, but
fascinating. I never
also,
thought that.
yes. Okay. But also it enables us to build trust. So we can tell if someone's being shifty eyed with us, right? So there's a theory in evolutionary psychology that we evolved whites around our eyes specifically for trust building, because now I can tell if someone is looking right at me or if they're kind of looking like, so again, just a theory, but my point in bringing this up is that eye contact is incredibly important in terms of humans reading each other and learning how to build trust and healthy relationship. And we don't get that through our phones.
Wow.
Okay, so that was absence of physical cues. We've got constant connection. I put a photo of an alarm clock here to remind me to say, teens are setting alarms during the night to wake up, to check their phones because they don't want to be in trouble. I swear to you, this is true. I just read a whole article about this. They don't want to be in trouble at school the next day if they didn't reply to someone yet or see someone's story or watch something that they were supposed to have seen. So I'm not saying that this is prevalent. Not every teen is doing this, but this is a phenomenon where they're anxious enough about having missed something at school the next day, particularly of a real friend, right, of a real relationship, that they set an alarm to wake themselves up during the night. Constant connection. Okay, and then we have quantifiability. Everybody's familiar with this, right? This relates to our sense of social belonging, like I was talking about earlier, right? Suddenly you can see how many friends you have, where you stand with those friends. Everything's quantified in terms of where you stand in the social hierarchy. And default publicness, right? So the default is that everyone can see it, right? And to their credit, the platforms have invented some, close friends features, or that you have stories that you only share with your close friends. But even that by default is public, because anyone who is in your close friends can take a screenshot of your story and send it to everyone, right? You're trusting them not to, but in theory they could. And they do. And this
So our kids are living in a much more public world than we've ever lived in, because I could send a note to a friend of mine and nobody, pass a note in school and maybe somebody could grab it, but it never would have, even though I went to a small school, would have gotten to every single person in the school.
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yes. And it happens all the time. So this creates like really highly stressful situations for young people, right? Where they shared something, right? I just read an interview with a young person where I'll do a quick anecdote where she had started dating a boy who used to date somebody kind of in her friend group. And so she posted a photo of her with her boyfriend, and one of their mutual friends, right? Her and the girl that used to date this guy, took a screenshot of that post, put a barf emoji over it, right? Like, then posted it in her story to her close friends, right? Her close friends took a screenshot that she'd done that and sent it back to the original girl. This is just an example, okay, of the kind of, yeah. And this is also happening with nudes, which we'll get to in a minute.
So everything is public. I mean, we hear the term everything is content, but really everything is public, because you never know if you could be being filmed at school or being, photos or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I brought up this picture of the panopticon because what this is doing to identity development, right? I think we don't really know yet, but it's definitely doing something, right? Constantly having everyone's watchful eye on you while you're trying to explore your identity and figure out who you are. Do you remember what it was like to be 13? That sounds terrible.
Sounds even worse than being 13 again. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So we should be very nice to these kids. They're going through a lot.
We should be very nice to them. We should be so kind and gentle. So anyway, all of this doom and gloom to say education does work. So I put the reference here, but basically there's really compelling evidence that teaching teens and tweens about the addictive design features, teaching them, giving them education about this stuff does motivate them to change their social media use, right? So starting the conversations, getting it going without blaming, without shaming, without inducing any guilt, just educating does help, does matter.
And we talk about that so much in prevention work with other spaces. I mean, because everybody here is part of prevention, we do talk about how we have to have these conversations without blaming parents, without blaming caregivers, without blaming victims. So this is really just a continuation of that.
Yes.
We are having these open conversations about this tough topic.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a great segue too, because I'm about to kind of transition into talking about how to talk about it.
Great.
Okay. So I talked about this before, but social belonging and adolescent development, right? So no other media has defined our social lives in this way, where we're so interconnected. Everything is so on display, quantified, scalable. Remember the list, right? So at this age, you have a really intense, 11 to 15 or whatever, a really intense sensitivity to social feedback. So it's hard for adults, right? We're already all hooked. And then if you couple that with this really high sensitivity to social feedback, that makes you incredibly susceptible to the pull of social media, right? And also to acknowledge for teens that there are real consequences if they disconnect. And they know how hard it is, right? So I just pulled some quotes here from some interviews. The tricky part about growing up with social media is how dangerous and addictive it is. People are always glued to their phones, but so am I, and I hate that. So it's not, right? I think sometimes there's this perception from adults that like they want to be in their phone all the time. That's not true. They don't want to be, they feel like they have to be because they're terrified of the social consequences if they miss something. And I'll circle back to that, but I feel like I'm too interested in my phone instead of what's happening around me. I wish I didn't use my phone so much. From a 13-year-old. Okay, and so this brings me to my next point. If you aren't on social media a lot, you won't have as many friends. It's all linked. I think that one was 13 or 14, right? This is what teens want adults to know. When we're on our phone, there's a real conflict happening at school and we're trying to manage it, right? We're trying to put out fires, right? It's not always just, I think there's sometimes an assumption from adults that you're just on your phone being a TikTok zombie or whatever, right? But actually a lot of the time they're managing a real conflict. Somebody so-and-so said something in whatever comment thread about you and tagged you. And now somebody else took a screenshot of this other thing and this whole drama is unfolding. And so when your mom says, put your phone down, stop, and the kid says, I can't, that's because they can't. Not because, they're lying to you or they're, and they want help. And so there's this constellation of hidden social motivations and pressures and expectations that are placed on them with all of this that's going on. And the other thing they talk about a lot when you talk to them is the fact that it's inescapable, right? I can't get away. I can't just go home and leave it at school. And even if I leave the platform where the drama started, they'll find me somewhere else. Right? Like, let's say I'm in a conflict in some DM thread or some group chat and I leave the group chat, then they'll come find me. Like they can always find me. So this idea of just put your phone down and stop that adults are preaching at them is not realistic. And the other thing that I think can happen sometimes, I put this other quote here, is that oftentimes, I think adults are thinking of online connections only in terms of predators, when majority of what is happening for young people on their phones is conflict with their real life friends. It's conflict that started at school. It's conflict with some boy from a grade above them or what, and so when we think about it as just, oh, there's online predators trying to get you, we're missing opportunities to support them. One thing Sadie and I were talking about the other day, right, is this idea of like saying to them something to the effect of, would it be helpful if I took your phone away? Like, would it be like, do you want to tell your friends, right? Do you want me to be your scapegoat? Do you want to tell your friends, mom said, you can't have your phone anymore? Right? Like we've done this when we were kids. Do you remember the equivalent?
Oh yeah, I can't go out on Friday night, or I can't go to that party, or I can't, my mom won't let me be on the phone later, or whatever those pieces were.
Right.
And that's a really interesting thing to think about, how important we talk about communication all the time with prevention of, if kids don't know that they can come to us with what we might consider small things, they're not going to come to us with the big things. They're not going to do that. So this is a big piece of that conversation of just how we talk to them about their phones too. Yes. Who are you talking to? What are you talking about? What does that mean? How does that feel? If I'm understanding you correctly. And that kind of can help us recognize when there are those danger situations. Right. And there are those concerns. Right.
And how can I help you? Right? Like, let's get on the same team. Okay. So something bad happened at school and now it's exploding. It's exploding in your phone at you from all angles. And there's, you're in some group chat and everyone's right. And then it's on this other app too. Okay. So this is really overwhelming. And remembering that high susceptibility to social feedback, right? So to you, with your fully developed prefrontal cortex, right? Lucky you, you made it to adulthood. You made it past 27. Congratulations. Right? You're thinking, oh, this isn't a big deal. Just who cares? Right? But to them, social belonging, we are social primates. Social belonging is the most important thing. And at that vulnerable age, it is life or death, right? Whether or not you belong. And if you think, again, going back to evolutionary psychology, if you think about it, for a lot of times it really was life or death in the past, right? Like you get kicked out of the group. That means you don't get to eat. Nobody's hunting for you, right? Especially when you're at that age where maybe you can't hunt for yourself yet. So to you, it might seem silly, but so I bring that up to say, like, be gentle and remember that what to you might seem trite and silly to them is real.
I love the concept of we're a team in navigating this.
Yes.
And starting that early. So that way, when we get older, we're somewhat hardwired into those pieces.
Yeah. So these are some things I sort of already said, but basically this idea that there are real social consequences. And this quote, you can't always shut your phone off and be done with it. These conflicts spill over into the real world, right? So the kids what teens want adults to know is like, stop telling me to just put my phone down. Stop blaming me. I'm trying to manage conflict. Help me manage the conflict instead of yelling at me to put my phone down, because that's not an option. Okay. And now with just a couple minutes left, if I'm managing to keep us on time here, and we can talk about this more in the follow-up conversation. I think this one's maybe better for conversation than slides, but regardless, let's talk about sexting. Okay. So we all know this already, right? Abstinence only education does not work. You know this, you work in this field. So repeat after me. I will not contribute to the digital age version of abstinence only education. I will not contribute to the digital age version of abstinence only education. I will not contribute to the digital age version of abstinence only education. I will not. Good. Thank you. Thanks for playing. I appreciate that. So even if that's all we get here, that's amazing. So for some numbers about prevalence, I'm sorry, I didn't get the reference down here. I'll update the slides with the references and then send them to Sadie so you can have that. Because the sexting part is new for me and for you. So 1 in 7, this is I believe 11 to 15-year-olds or something. Again, I'll need to fact check that. But 1 in 7 teens and tweens has sent a sex message. 1 in 3 has received one, and 1 in 10, a much lower number, has actually forwarded one on, right? So taking the screenshot and sending it on, like we talked about. And then the other thing, the nuance that I think adults aren't understanding, right? Because it's really easy to just feel gross thinking about teens and tweens sexting at all, right? It's really easy to just be like, oh, don't do that. That's yuck. Don't do that, right? But thinking about it being mutually wanted in a healthy relationship versus being pressured versus being shared without permission. These are really, really different things. And this matters a lot in terms of thinking about consent, right? I'm not going to read all of these, but like I said, I'll share the slide. So this is from a study where they polled, I forget, thousands of teenagers and asked them why they sexed, and the top 9 reasons why teens sexed. And one thing I want to highlight here, and you can kind of skim this while I'm talking. Oh, there's some typos here. Sorry about that. But the one thing that teens really want adults to know is that sometimes they're trying, right? Like their values alignment sometimes is actually pure, right? Like there's this dilemma when it comes to sending a nude where when you talk to them about it, they'll say, well, it isn't really about the nude. It's about building intimacy and trust, right? Like, do you trust me enough to send it to me? Like, that's the underlying thing here, right? It's like, if I'm really your girlfriend and you trust me enough, or I'm really your boyfriend and you trust me enough, you'll send it to me. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, now they're in this real kind of catch-22 here where it's like, well, I don't really want to send it. And girls, I'll tell you one more anecdote. Girls come up with crazy solutions to this. I just read an interview and to prepare for this, where this girl was talking about how basically what she did to get around this was because it was a new boy that she kind of thought she liked, but she wasn't really sure if she could trust him. So she went on the internet, found images, headless, that looked approximately like her body, looked pretty close, sent them to her friends, to her good girlfriends, saying, do you think this looks like me? And they all said, yeah, that looks like you. And then she watermarked them, took screenshots of her texting her friends. So she has backup evidence now. So if they leak, her friends can back her up and say, that's not really her. She took that off the internet. Then sent the fake nude to the boy to test him, to see. Now, if this gets leaked, I'm going to know that you did it. And I have evidence to show that I didn't really send you a real nude, because I showed all my girlfriends ahead of time. I watermarked it, showing that I stole it from the, right? So they're coming up with extraordinarily creative solutions of how to get around this predicament they're in, which is when you're asked and you're genuinely interested in developing some intimacy and trust with that person, you don't want to say no, you want to say yes, but you also understand the social consequences of if you can't trust them. So anyway, I digress. The last thing I'll say about,
mind-blowing,
right?
Like the CIA level of that is mind-blowing.
And this is just one, I could give you, if you come back for the conversation and I can give you 20 of these, it's crazy, the things they're doing.
So really, when we're talking, these conversations are starting to work, it sounds like, with kids, that
yes.
we're being successful in explaining that we shouldn't just send pictures, and we need to maybe be coming up with some strategies to help them do this, so that way there is less of that chance of predators kind of coming in and taking advantage of this situation.
Yes. And describing like the best practices for safe sexting, right? Like through the framework of consent, through, not contributing to abstinence-only education, not saying never, ever, ever send a picture, never, ever, because that's not going to work. Rather describing the contexts of consent, of trust building, of ways to protect yourself, right? And the other thing that young girls talk about a lot is to please stop victim blaming, right? So I thought I trusted this boy. And I know I'm being gendered with my language here, but in the research, it is, sorry, facts are there, the numbers are there. It's the boys asking more often. So I know I'm being gendered in my language, but I can back it up with the numbers if you need me to. Which I should actually touch on that. Queer and transgendered folks have a whole other suite of issues around being outed, right? In terms of if they're sexting someone, right? The bigger concern there is around being outed if they're not out yet in terms of whatever piece of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so that's a separate suite of issues. But while we're talking about sexting, the young women repeatedly say, please stop blaming me. I thought I could trust this boy. I tried to trust him. Why is he not the one who's in trouble? One, for asking me for this, right? So can we start educating young men, which actually there's this beautiful, I swear I'll stop soon, Sadie. There's this beautiful TikTok account. This trend, I think it was 2021-ish that happened, where young men were making TikToks mocking boys who ask for nudes. Basically just like, cool young guys were starting this movement on TikTok being like, this is gross, you're disgusting. And one of them had like 3 or 5 million views, this young guy basically saying, so my point is there's a lot of hopeful momentum here, right? Of like the tides are changing and young men don't, right? So it's about how do we support them in that culture shift that they're already starting it, right? It's just how can we support and continue that of like, yes, asking for nudes is gross. Right. You got it. That's right. Don't do that. And not blaming the girl, if the girl does send one and it leaks, not making, not shaming her in such an intense way, and maybe shifting some of that blame to the person who asked and then also redistributed it without consent. Why is that not the person who's getting publicly shamed?
This is really all fascinating stuff, and I'm so excited to continue this conversation. And
I'm only a couple minutes over. I did pretty good.
no, you're doing fantastic.
That's the end of what I've got anyway. So.
So we will continue this conversation because I'm sure everybody has a bunch of questions. I have like 4 million more that I didn't ask. I tried to be good. So July 18th, 9 a.m., you'll all have that Zoom invite. If you can't attend, or you just want to make sure that you send me the questions that you want to ask, feel free to send me some questions in advance. I will share them with Annie and make sure that we are having this conversation. We can talk a little bit more about like how a lot of this brain stuff, a lot of this is all kind of interconnected with so much of the work that we're doing with abuse prevention and with particularly sexual abuse prevention. Consent, we know we talk about ad nauseum. But every time we get new tools, it's always a good thing. So thank you, Annie. Really appreciate your time and your energy and your thought process. And thank you everyone for watching, and looking forward to our conversation on July 18th. Thanks.
Yes, see you there. Thanks, everybody.